Hi, Artimus Paint here. This video is the second part of my series on the shortcut method to estimating your probability of winning a hand when you have a draw and you're sure that your opponent has a set. If you haven't watched the first video of this series, you should watch that first in order to understand this one. I've left a link for the first video in the description. So in the first video, I gave some simple methods for estimating your probability of winning a hand within 1% of the exact percentage when you have a draw and you're almost 100% sure that your opponent has a set. However, there is one more potential adjustment you may need to make to this estimate. It's the case where the player holding a set has a backdoor flush draw that can potentially beat your draw. It's a very simple adjustment you have to make, but it's an important adjustment. And it's important to get these right because when you can play draw hands well, you can come across as an aggressive player. In this video, I will explain when and why you need to make this adjustment and how to actually make this adjustment. So just a reminder, this was the formula for single draws. It gets you within 1% of the correct percentage. However, there are occasional situations where you may be 2 or 3% away from the correct percentage. So this is the standard flush draw versus set situation. We use the formula and we get within 1% of the correct percentage. You should note that the button's highest card is higher than any card on the board. We're not worried, in this case, of the big blind having a higher backdoor flush draw because he can't have a set and a higher backdoor flush draw here. In this example, we are concerned about the big blind having a higher backdoor flush draw. Our estimate is around 3% out against the button having the ace of spades and the ace of hearts. This isn't because the big blind has a set of aces as opposed to a lower set. It's because he has a set with a backdoor flush draw to a higher flush than the button. For example, if the turn card is the 5 of spades, the button hits his flush. However, the big blind has 17 outs on the river. He has the normal 10 outs that pair the board and an additional 7 spade outs. This gives him around a 38% chance of winning. Also note that there are only 2 combos of sets out of 9 that you have to be concerned about. What I'm getting at here is if you didn't know whether the big blind had a set of aces, kings or twos, but you just knew that he had a set, he could have any of 9 combos of sets on the flop. He can't have a set of kings with a spade in his hand because there's a spade on the board. So the only way that your opponent can have a set with a higher spade in his hand is if he has 2 of the 3 combos of aces. That's the ace of spades with the ace of clubs or the ace of spades with the ace of hearts. So I'll go through a few more examples just to show that when a player has a set and with a backdoor flush draw, the estimate is consistently 3% too high. And that's with just one exception, and I'll show you that now. So this is an example of a straight draw. When you read your opponent as having a set, you won't usually know which set he has on this type of board where all the cards are mid-range or 9 and below. We don't have to worry about the big blind having a flush draw if we knew that he has a pair of 9s or 2s. However, if he has a pair of 8s with the 8 of spades, our formula goes to or around 2% out. So let's look at multiple draws. So just a reminder, this is the formula for estimating multiple draws. I've covered this in detail in the previous video. So this is a gut shot with a flush draw. There are only 11 outs and not 12 for the button because the ace of hearts will pair the board. If the big blind has a set of fours or kings, this estimate is accurate. If he has a set of aces without a heart, this estimate is also accurate. However, if he has a set of aces with a heart, this estimate is 3% too high. So let's look at one final example before I explain what you can do about this 3% error. So here's an example of an open-ended straight draw with a flush draw. As with all flush draws, there's one less out than normal. In this case, there are 14 outs and not 15 because the 9 of hearts will pair the board. So here you don't have to worry about the big blind having a backdoor flush draw because the Queen of Hearts is on the board and you have the next highest heart. However, in this hand, there are two combos of sets where the big blind could have the Queen of Hearts in his hand. As you can see, in this case, the estimate is an overestimate by around 3% again. So let's look at what we have so far. When the big blind has a set and a backdoor flush draw, any flush draw for the button, with or without other draws, is overestimated by 3%. Hero's straight draw without a flush draw is overestimated by 2%. And there's a reason for this difference. When hero has a flush draw, all the turn flush cards which give hero a flush will also give villain a flush draw if he holds a higher flush card. With open-ended straight draws, you have 8 outs. Only 2 of your outs on the turn will give your opponent give your opponent's backdoors extra outs on the river. So let's figure out what to do when this 3% and 2% messes up my basic formula. There are 3 situations. The first situation is when you know your opponent is playing his hand as if he has a set. However, he can have any of the 9 combos of sets on the flop. The second situation is when you know your opponent is playing his hand as if he has a set. However, he can only have 6 combos of sets on the flop. In this example, villain is under the gun. If you see him as a tight regular, he's unlikely to have entered the pot from under the gun with a pair of 4s. Therefore, you could put him on aces or kings. Now, some regulars at microstakes will try and get into the pot with low pocket pairs. However, they usually have a bet size tell. For example, they'll try and sneak in with medium and low pocket pairs with a raise of 2.5 big blinds, but they'll raise pre-flop with premium pocket pairs with 3 big blinds or more. So you should look for that kind of bet size tell. The third situation is when you can put your opponent on top set only. In this situation, under the gun is unlikely to have entered the pot with 5s or 4s. Therefore, by process of elimination, if he is playing as if he has a set, he must have aces. So here's the solution. If your opponent has a potential backdoor flush draw that can beat your draw, you need to minus the numbers in the table from the result of my estimating formula. So you use the formula from my last video as normal. If your opponent has a potential backdoor flush draw that can beat your hand, you minus the numbers in the table from the result of my formula. The idea is that the numbers average out. If your opponent doesn't have the backdoor flush draw, you'll be underestimating your chances of winning. If he does have the backdoor flush draw, you'll be overestimating your chances of winning. Over an infinite number of hands, this should average out as the correct percentage. So I put the formula in for situations where the formula overestimates your chance by 3% when your opponent has the backdoor flush draw. If you're calculating the adjustment for the straight draws where the overestimate is potentially 2%, you would just have to change the 3%, minus 3% in the formula to minus 2%. So that's all for this video. I'll do one more video on this subject, and this is when you have a pair and a flush draw and you know villain has a set. So please subscribe if you want to see more videos on this channel.